couple of days ago, Iran stated once again that anyone who attacks Syria is like attacking Iran, that they would stand behind them 100%. But as I've said many times, what you hear out loud usually is a far cry from what's really going on behind the scenes. As I've reported many times, also there are things happening with Russia and the United States and U.S. and Iran. If Russia, for example, could gain an interest of their choice from the United States, they would throw Syria under the bus in a heartbeat. Certainly they do have a lot invested in Syria right now, but Syria is a very small picture compared to the bigger picture that Russia has going with the United States. And that also goes for Iran. And that's why I say anytime you hear somebody quote something from one of the tabloid type newspapers, such as, we'll say, the Jerusalem Post or Beyond Top Secret or some other subscription-based type, reader-driven type newspaper, it's likely going to be there's going to be likely going to be a lot of sensationalism added to what the truth really is, or they may leave something out just to keep you hanging. Now, let me speak directly regarding that between Russian and U.S. relations. As many of you know, the G20 just got finished or is in the process of finishing up. And, of course, both the U.S. and the Russian president did not meet. They did shake hands, but they did not meet. It's all part of a plan that they have of playing up their disagreements over certain situations, namely Syria. But there is a much bigger picture that is being played. As many of you may know, Russia is one of the leading producers of oil and natural gas, not only in its region but also in Europe. But with the onset of U.S. shale oil finds throughout and also in Canada, there is a great fear that Russia may very well be competing against the United States in a very short amount of time with U.S. exports of both. Right now, Russia has a lock on oil and natural gas in Europe, but right now the United States is in the process of possibly making their way over to Europe. Just as we have sent tankers over from the Middle East to the United States and imported oil, we very well may be in the near future doing the same thing, sending our oil and our natural gas over to Europe and competing with Russia. And this is what a article from Stratford says. It says, so while the Kremlin and the White House are publicly playing up their disagreements over Russian human rights groups and Syria, at least that's what's going on in public, the points of contention are essentially minor subplots of larger struggles over the future of energy and Europe. The fight between Washington and Moscow over these issues is taking place primarily behind the scenes, and both countries expect the rivalry to continue for the foreseeable future. And it is this rivalry that is very detrimental to Russia, because about 50 and as much as 70% of Russia's government budget is based upon energy receipts, meaning a loss of market share in Europe or other areas in which Russia has dominated for years would be a major blow to government expenditures. So there's a much broader play for control over a certain area and basic territory that Russia has dominated for many years. And as the U.S. continues its drive toward being the number one oil and natural gas producers, many believe that will take place by 2017 or 2018. Look for this battle to continue, but don't look for it to play out over public airwaves. It is very likely that Syria or some other type of domestic dispute will serve as a cloaking device to keep this under wraps, the real problem. So don't think for a minute that Russia wouldn't throw Syria under the bus in a minute. In fact, they sent certain components of the S-300 surface-to-air missile system to Syria, which is something that Israel does fear. And it is a very sophisticated defense system. But due to non-payment, much of the critical parts that would make it operational have not been shipped. So basically, it's like sending somebody a gun but holding on to the bullets. So at this point in time, the S-300s are not operational at all. Now on to Syria. As many of you know, U.S. President Barack Obama has been trying to drum up support both abroad and at home. But it seems that that's simply not working out. Frankly, my speculation is that he will not go forward with an attack on Syria. And even if he did, it wouldn't be of anything of significance in the first place. Of course, many different plans have been circulating, but and also that's been going on in the White House as well. But as I've said, you need to remember, and this is what Stratford has to say on that. It says, public statements are not always the best indicators of how nations will act. Meaning that whatever they're saying out loud is likely not what they're saying behind the scenes. And just because somebody says they're ready to attack in a moment's notice, they very well may not be. And going on with the article, it says ultimately deployed assets and military operations will reveal the extent to which Washington will act against the regime itself. The extent of the damage and the target sets will also determine whether U.S. military action will be merely symbolic or have an appreciable effect on the Civil War. The movement of certain assets, particularly the USS Nimitz Carrier Strike Group, to the Red Sea is particularly interesting. But the strike group has not yet been committed to a potential strike, and more important, Stratford has not yet seen the deployment of other units needed to support comprehensive strikes. So even though there are a number of assets that are in place for such a strike, important support assets have not been placed in order for a strike to be viable. And going on with the article, it says, indeed, degrading Syria's chemical weapons capabilities would require more military assets than the United States has in the region at this time. However, moving the USS Nimitz Carrier Strike Group and tactical aircraft to the region would only take a few days. If the United States wanted to expand the scope of this mission, it could do so very quickly. And here are some of the things that they possibly could do. It says, notably, the United States could hybridize its strike options. It could tailor a set of ongoing strikes to hit a number of air bases, aircraft, and facilities critical to the regime's power or air power. Otherwise, it could damage the regime's ballistic missile force and overall inventory of tube and rocket artillery through attrition. While such actions fall within the scope of a limited operation, they could hardly be considered comprehensive, and they would nonetheless give the rebels the advantage in their own fight against al-Assad. And closing out the article, it says the White House will have to walk a tightrope between demonstrating a credible response to the regime's alleged use of chemical weapons and the fear that their response against the regime will be too powerful. Given that al-Assad has controlled Damascus during the 2 years marked by civil war, he could probably weather a limited U.S. strike. But in war, no plan survives first contact with the enemy, and even the best plans are susceptible to miscalculation, escalation, mission creep, and unintended consequences. Any of these outcomes could shape the course of Syria's civil war beyond Washington's intentions. And I believe it was Mr. Putin said the other day that he believed that a miscalculation could bring about catastrophic results in possibly nuclear war. And I suppose even though that could be considered sensationalism, that could very well be true. Because as stated by Stratford, unintended plans and miscalculations, and escalations can always take a well-crafted plan in a very different direction. So even though these are well thought out military analysis, even the best laid strategies can go awry and turn into something that could be very, very deadly. Not only for Syria, but for the region as a whole. But if there's one thing we need to understand and remember, there is a psychological war going on within regional players, such as Russia, Syria, and Iran and others. Even Israel, for that matter, in the United States. And much of a pre-war strategy is psychological. And as we've heard many times, both Russia and Syria have claimed that any strike on their territory would turn the Middle East into a ball of flames. That, in essence, is a part of the psychological warfare that they are playing upon the American public, and will likely be the reason behind why Mr. Obama will not get the backing of the American people, nor Congress for that matter. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I don't think he's even going to go it alone. Certainly I could be wrong, but I do believe that this is going to basically set a precedent in which Mr. Obama will be seen as a weak, wishy-washy president that says one thing and it has no bite. And I think it's going to lead to a real problem for Israel. Now, whether that problem will materialize during Mr. Obama's reign or whether it will be in future presidents is unknown. But I think it's going to set a precedent that will keep Israel as an ally, but the bite that we used to have years ago will no longer be visible or apparent to countries such as Russia, Syria, Iran, or the like. In fact, it wouldn't shock me a bit if both Iran and North Korea introduced their nuclear program in defiance of the United States. But we'll have to wait and see how this plays out as time goes on. But as always, I always like to close with a word of salvation. That if you don't know the Lord, you need to before it's everlasting. As I've said many times, 150,000 people die every day with their sins paid for, but the vast majority of them have died with their sins paid and have rejected that payment. Jesus died for your sins and He paid it all. Don't be one of those who die with their sins paid for and reject His love. This is Terry Malone with the Calvary Prophecy Report.